We live in a caffeinated society. I work in a real estate office. I got so tired of healthcare I could cry. I have attention deficit disorder, and to have to do the same thing day after day after day after day just got overwhelming. And one day it was cold and rainy, and I said, if I have to have one more patient with hormones and they cry, I'll quit. And she did. And I did. And I had to find something else to do. So that's what I'm doing right now is I'm selling, I call it, I sell boards and dirt. And I meet a lot of people. And I'm thankful there are other good practitioners taking care of the sick people. I'm glad for that. But I'm also very thankful I'm not one of them anymore. But I will do anything I can to go out of my way to help other people. The office I live in, I work in, I live in it sometimes. Everybody comes in the morning and they turn on the coffee machine. They've all got little plaques on their desks. Don't mess with me till I've had my coffee, or, all that kind of stuff. And I walk in the morning, I don't need coffee. I really don't understand what's wrong with these people, other than they have burned themselves out with it. And it has become an addiction. And it's a sad addiction because, people claim that marijuana is the gateway drug. I'm going to tell you what, caffeine is the gateway drug. So many people are so addicted to it. It's just a tragedy. The survey in the U.S., and I'll give you my statistics because I don't know yours, but we're all human and we're probably all about the same. 94% of adults surveyed confess that they drink this stuff on a daily basis. 64 on a daily basis, the others frequently. And it's Coca-Cola, it's Mountain Dew, it's Monster, it's Pepsi, it's whatever. They're just, coffee, tea, they just cannot survive without it. And I watch them. They get through that first hour and they got to have another one. And after that begins to wear out, then they got to have another one. So do you know if you had the amount of caffeine that's in a cup of coffee is roughly 120 milligrams. If you put that into a syringe and popped it into your vein and you pushed the plunger down, you would die. It's that toxic. And you would die fairly immediately. So you don't do it that way and you don't die. You put it in your mouth, you drink it, and it goes down in your stomach and it goes into your digestive tract. And now chemical receptors begin to pick up that it's there. And they immediately send a brain message and said, the fool's trying to kill us again. Get a message down to the adrenal glands. Let's get some adrenaline. We've got to get circulation up and we've got to get this stuff to the liver where the liver can detoxify it and save us from dying. And that's the cycle that goes through. And finally, the liver is done with its job and it's detoxified it all out. And he's like, wow, we got to get a rest. And, respiration goes back to normal. The heart rate goes back to normal. Everything's back to normal. And you say, man, I'm tired. I need another cup. And it just goes on and on endlessly. And you cannot continue to do that endlessly before you eventually come to some sort of biological exhaustion. And we used to call it adrenal fatigue. And I had so many patients when I was in practice with adrenal fatigue. And I could tell that, some of it might be they worked too long hours, but the majority were because of their caffeine consumption. Caffeine comes in a lot of different forms, and it pays to read the labels. Caffeine is addictive. The Journal of Psychopharmacology talks about when you go into withdrawal. You can have headaches, irritability, fatigue, which shows you very graphically that you are suffering an addiction. Frankly, I would prefer to be addicted to sunshine and fresh air and water and good food and family and things like that. I really don't need that kind of constant prodding. One of the problems you run to with caffeine is it does have a negative effect on your cardiovascular system. A lot of people don't realize it, but 50% of the people who will develop cardiovascular disease, their first warning is death. Not really good odds, is it? Your early warning system is when you tip over and die. And that has a lot to do with your diet, but your heart can only get kicked so many times before it's just plain tired. You ever ride a horse for a lot of miles to the point that horse was exhausted? You can beat it and it just can't go any farther. And a lot of people, their bodies and their hearts, their adrenal glands, everything, they're just tired. Hypertension is an epidemic. And what happens is when your arteries begin to narrow down, your capillaries begin to narrow down, your heart has to pump harder and increase the pressure to get the same flow. Because if your heart just slowed down and the flow slowed down, then the oxygen to your brain will slow down and everything slows down and you die. So that's why you got to find a way to pump harder. It's a reflex that God gave your body. Sleep disruptions. I saw a funny cartoon the other day. Y'all know we have lots of bears where I come from, and they hibernate in the winter, right? This cartoon had 3 bears. They're in a cave together, and 2 of them are, and one of them's laying there. Why in the world did I have coffee in October? I thought it was cute. I got a giggle out of that one. It affects your sleep. And I'm not going to do that this week, but studying the biology of sleep is amazing. And all your sleep is controlled by cycles. And if you don't get your sleep in a prescribed amount of time and go through the right amount of cycles before midnight, you miss out on the hormones that cause your body to clean itself up. And if you do that, you age much faster than other people around you. So going to bed late is not your friend. I had this little old grandma that showed up in a clinic when I was in Peru many years ago. And everybody that showed up, I would ask them the questions, how much water do you drink? The average water consumption all around this planet, from my informal survey, is 4 cups a day, 4 glasses a day. That's what the average person consumes. And if you consume more, then good for you. But I would ask the people, they say, we need pills. Oh, we need pills. And I'm like, what do you want the pills for? Oh, and they run off this long list of problems. And I'm thinking, do I send this lady home with 12 different meds, or what are we going to do here? So I began to just teach people. And so when I would go to I worked with the Federal Health Service in Peru for a while as a volunteer, and they would take us to a city and bring us in, and then they would have, through their social system, identified all these hard cases that really needed help, and we would take care of them. But I began to realize I was telling the same people the same things over and over and over, and I was spending so much time that I didn't really have time to do patient care. So I said, okay, before we get started, I know you guys are probably anxious to get cared for and get out of here, but how would you like to, instead of me sending you home with a bunch of pills, how would you like to learn how to not be sick and how not to get sick again? And they said, yeah, let's do that. So I said, give me 45 minutes. I started every city with the same 45-minute presentation so that I didn't have to give it individually to every person that walked out the door. And it's you got to cut your intake of fried foods. You got to stop the caffeine. You got to drink water. You have to go to bed at this time at night. I went through the whole routine of healthy living. And then I asked them at the end, was it worth it? And they'd all stand up and cheer because they realized it was worth it. And then we would take care of the people. Well, these people in this one city, they were really a bunch of tough cases with bad habits. And they just would say the same things over and over again, all the same things. And so I had this little lady show up near the end. And I said, okay, so what's your list of complaints, ma'am? Do you have achy bones and joints? No. You don't? No. Do you have hypertension? No. I went through the whole list that everybody else came up with, and I said, so why'd you come? And she said, I'm tired. I said, okay. Are you really tired, like deeply fatigued? No, just a little bit. Just a little bit. I said, so I want to know about your life. Do you drink coffee and Coca-Cola and all this stuff, all day long? She said, no, I'm too poor to waste my money on that. I live in a little cabin up in the hill by myself, and I have a really good spring behind my house. I love the water, and that's what I drink. Okay. So do you eat lots of, fried pork and all this stuff? She said, no, I don't like that. I really like the stuff that's in my garden. I like fruit and vegetables, and I eat some beans and rice. That's pretty much what I eat. I said, you don't have any... I said, let me take your blood pressure, and it was just normal. I said, let me listen to your heart, and it was normal. And I went through the whole thing, and I was just bewildered. And I said, okay, you don't match anybody else in the town. I said, so do you stay up till midnight like everybody else? She said, no, I'm too poor. I don't have electricity. I just go to bed when the rooster goes to bed, and I get up when he gets up. I said, okay. So what do you do all day? She said, well, I have to go out and work in my garden and, all that sort of thing. And, I don't have a lot of tools, so I have to do it by my hands. And I get tired. So could I have some vitamins? And I said, certainly, I'll get you some vitamins. I said, by the way, how old are you? And she said, 101. And all of these other people who were in the process of disintegrating were in their 50s. It drove me insane to have these people have this incredible list, this huge, long shopping list of maladies, and they looked like Methuselah's grandmother, and they were way younger than I was. God just has a plan, and if you follow the plan like she was, you short-circuit the whole other list of problems. We had a client last week, the two girls in the office, they said we need to buy them or make a really nice housewarming gift when they move in. What do you think we should give them? And I said, a whole case of Xanax, an anxiety drug. I said, they have been the worst worry people I have ever encountered. Everything is a catastrophe, and we have had zero problems on this case. Anxiety. When you are constantly pushing yourself with caffeine, you cannot help but be anxious. It affects your brain that way, even to the point of developing panic disorder. And I'm not making this up. This is out of the journals. Now, you will find there are studies out there about all kinds of things that we know aren't good for you, saying that the stuff is good for you, right? Do you know who, by and large, furnishes the money for those studies? The industry for that product. All the stuff that says milk is good for you and it'll make strong bones, it's funded by the American Dairy Association. And if the truth be known, milk does not make strong bones. Milk causes osteoporosis. So I like to see who funds the studies. Caffeine blocks a lot of your nutrient absorption. Iron. People are always thinking they need a little more iron because they're a little tired and whatever. If you stop beating the horse, maybe he could just go on his own. Calcium, and that's why we see in osteoporosis, we're always counseling patients, knock off the coffee, the tea, the pops, get rid of that stuff out of your life. It is contributing to causing hormonal disruptions in your body that are causing underlying factors that bring about osteoporosis. And your B vitamins, and what do your B vitamins do? They support your neurological system more than anything else. So you take away all the things and block all the things that would help you and then bring something else in to try and compensate for it. And what people don't realize is if I'm tired now and I grab caffeine, I'm not creating vitality or energy. I'm borrowing it out of my bank for tomorrow or the next week. Calcium absorption, if you suppress it, osteoporosis is quite certain, friends. 50% of women develop osteoporosis in their lifetime, and 20% of men. Those are worldwide facts. I mentioned hormone disruptions. They disrupt especially women more than men. Caffeine has a lot to do with things like fibrocystic breast disease. They have a lot to do with PMS, increasing the severity of menopause, endometriosis. If you've ever had it or known someone who did, it's not fun. Increases the risk of ovarian cancer. Ovarian cancer is one of the worst. It's not all that far behind pancreatic cancer for mortality. And I seriously would avoid it at all costs. Isn't she cute? It's only 35. She drinks 12 cups a day. Caffeine truly does interfere with your collagen and how it works in your skin. It decreases the elasticity of your skin and ages you prematurely. Not just by fatiguing you, but it actually does age your skin. Now, that said, if you can look at some of these anti-aging cosmetics, they have caffeine in them and you put them on topically. It's a different delivery system, and I'm not all that sure how this works long term because this is new. They've just started doing this. It'll take a few years to find that out. Adrenal fatigue. When your adrenal glands, they sit on top of your kidneys, when they quit, they're really hard to get started again. I have seen so many people who by the time they were like in their 50s had come down with such a severe case of it, they really never had a productive life after that. We have some tricks to try and refurbish them and remanufacture them and make them work again. But not having it happen is just by far the best route. Don't go wreck something and then hope somebody can put it back together again, because it's not a short fix. It takes years to fix it. Remember these two? Lucille Ball? You remember the little movie about them in the candy factory? I tried really hard to get a video clip of that, and they fixed it so I couldn't download it somehow. But they were given one last chance in this candy factory or they were fired. And so the lady put them on that conveyor line, and they were to put them in the chocolates into the individual little cups and then put them in a box and then send them down. And she said, yeah, you're getting it. You're doing okay. You're doing that. Turn up the speed. And the thing goes faster and faster. And pretty soon they're eating them. They're shoving them down their blouses. They're putting them in their hats. They're doing everything in the world they possibly can. Because if one gets by, they're fired. It's a classic. And that's what you do to yourself in terms of your thought processes in your brain when you have caffeine on board. So in your brain, you have receptors for a chemical that your body makes called adenosine. And adenosine is kind of like a brake, pushing on the brakes. Hold on, don't make that decision. Think about it, slow down. You maybe don't want to buy this car, you maybe don't want to buy this house. Slow down, don't make a snap decision. Let's think about it. Let's think about it. Caffeine shuts that off. And now you tend to make decisions that you probably might not have made. It affects the frontal lobe. What goes on in the frontal lobe? Judgment. That worries me. It is a psychoactive drug. Sometimes we say that it makes you sharper. You can be a little more accurate in some of the things that you do. But we're discovering that that may be short-term, but long-term, it is associated with cognitive degeneration, deficits, impairing your memory and your attention span. I have seen some studies that are connecting it to Alzheimer's as not being the cause, but being a possible contributor. They did this study with caffeine on these soccer players, and they found that they could increase their accuracy of their, like, kicking for goals and whatnot, a bit, but their decision-making skills began to degenerate compared to the other people, and it was kind of dose-related. The more you took, the farther it would degenerate. So, you are bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and your spirit, which are God's. This is all about decision-making. Deciding to follow Christ is the most important decision you ever make. And then you have all these other smaller decisions that help support that major decision. And you want to make all of those correctly. And when you have a brain that you have disabled the parts that are the most important, how is it going to be trusted to make those decisions? And I've had people say, well, aren't you kind of exaggerating just a little bit? I don't think so. Because, remember what I said about the serpent? It was the most subtle animal in the garden. And the devil chose that one. He didn't choose a lion and have him roar. He got the most beautiful creature he could find and the most gentle, subtle creature that there was in the whole garden. And he wanted that to be his mouthpiece. So he uses the subtle things to work against us. You're familiar with the term, the still small voice? We've all heard it. And sometimes we listen and sometimes we don't listen. When I was in India many years ago, I got an invitation to come preach at this big church on a Sunday morning. I didn't know why but they said this very, very popular pastor in this other city that we weren't at he had heard I was there and he wanted to know if I would come. Sure, I'll go. I don't mind preaching in church on Sunday. I didn't have anything going on that day. So we said, sure. They said, we'll send a driver. We'll pick you up. So they came, and my friend Mike Avalon and I, we got in the car, and away we went. This driver speaks not a word of English, and we don't speak one word of Tamil. So we did a lot of this stuff to communicate. And my go-to is if they don't understand me, then I speak Spanish. Well, that doesn't do any good in India. Not a bit. So he knew where he was supposed to take us. And he brought us into this town, and as we're coming up to it, I noticed that there was a platform up on right by the gate coming in, and there was a golden calf. I suppose it was brass, but they worship Baal there, and Ashtaroth, and every god of the Old Testament. They have the groves and the high places and all of that. I have seen, typically people from India are fairly small in stature and they're not really big, burly people. But they had some very well-fed priests for the Baal temple, dressed in white diapers. And that's all they had on. And they had big bamboo poles on their shoulders. There were 6 of them, and then they had a platform up there, and they had loud music, and they were doing this thing with the parade through the town with their golden calf, and they were doing this as they were going through the town like this, and it was quite the thing. And so I saw that one there, and I said, well, they worship Baal here too, and they worship monkeys. They They have an elephant god who has a human body and an elephant's head, and it's a long, funny story. And we came into that city, and it wasn't a huge city, but it was, I think through the major downtown part of it was about 12 blocks. And as we're coming in, we noticed there's a procession, and we're like, what is this? And then it hit me. I saw all these Islamic people there, and I realized that we were in a heavily dominated area there of Islam. And these people were all dressed like Islamic people. And what is going on there? And I'm like, oh, that's right. Yesterday, one of the Hindu parliamentarians insulted an Islamic member. And so they were having a demonstration in the streets there. And I'm like, yeah, this could get a little uncomfortable. And we have very white faces. And we stick out like a sore thumb. Oh, this is not really good. And I'm trying to tell the guy, go around, go around. Do not go down the main street all the way to the other end of town, 12 blocks. There's people in there, and they're all going like this. You know how they do. You've seen them on TV. And go around. No English. No English. You don't need English to be smart enough to go around a demonstration of people who hate you, okay? Could not get through to him. He comes up to where they are there, and he's like, beep, 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 beep. Let's make them really mad. And then they won't get out of the way, and he's nudging them and pushing them and blowing the horn. And I said, Mike, we're dead. He said, you're right. We're not living through this. I said, we'll live through it if God wants us to. And when I was a little boy, I always wanted to be a superhero with a superpower. And mine, I wanted to be invisible. And I said, give me the video camera. I want to document this if we live through it. He said, well, don't put it up in the window. And I said, I didn't have any intention of putting it in the window. I was going to shoot it from down here. He said, okay. And so I'm taking video of this, and we're praying like crazy. And we're telling God, we're really, truly hoping we don't get beat to pieces today or dragged through the streets or whatever, get hung at the gates or whatever. Would you please take care of us? And after about a minute of that, I said, Mike, they can't see us. And he looked and he said, no, they're looking right straight through us like we're not here. And I'm thinking, I'm tempted to think, well, maybe that's our imagination. But both of us sensed that very strongly. And when we got out to the other end, we had about 30, 40 guys still on the very edge. And suddenly our invisibility shield disappeared. And they saw us, and they wanted to kill us. And they came after us, and they were beating on the vehicle and throwing rocks at us as we went out of the town. And I'm like, God did that to just confirm what he just did and make sure we didn't think it was our imagination and we just thought this up ourselves. Big confirmation to me. So with that all in my mind and all that adrenaline going in my bloodstream, we move on and we go to the next little city, and that's where this big, huge church was going to be. And as we come in to the parking lot, it was just filled with every kind of contrivance imaginable, and you knew there were a lot of people inside. Mike looks over at me, he said, you got a sermon? I forgot to ask you what you were preaching about. And I said, yeah, I got a sermon, we're good. Not coming without a sermon. So I walk up, and we start to come into the door, and the music was crazy loud. And just crazy, period. And the people are clapping and carrying on, and we get up and we look in there, and primarily women in there, and they were all being anointed by the Spirit. And they were jumping up in the air and falling on their backs and flopping on the floor and doing somersaults and rolling around. And the music was just, they had them into a frenzy. And it was obvious to me that there was a spirit in there that shouldn't be there. Mike looked over at me, he said, you still know what you're going to preach about? And I said, I have no idea. My mind is blank. I don't know what to do. And he said, I'm praying. He gives me this grin. It was really reassuring, Mike. And so I'm just saying, God, you got to talk to me. I got to get some instructions. I don't know what to do. And so they take us up front and they introduce us, and this place is packed, and all these people, and they're telling us them all about us and whatever. And the pastor's in a white suit, and he's got gold all over him, and very charismatic guy, and I'm sweating. Yes, it's hot in India, but I was sweating more than I should have because I was a little concerned, and I'm just praying, God, I don't know what to do. I have a Bible and no sermon and hundreds of people, and things are crazy in here, and I'm not comfortable in here. This makes the hair crawl up in the back of my neck. And just trying to get a deep breath, trying to think, praying. And they were just getting ready to bring us up for me to go ahead and start my sermon. And God says, oh, you ready? I want you to tell them the story about when Elijah ran away from Jezebel. I'm like, that's pure genius. That's amazing. Okay, now I feel really great. My blood pressure goes down and the sweat dries off. And I told them the story about how on Mount Carmel that he'd killed the prophets of Baal. And the people now were beginning to settle down. They weren't jumping anymore, and they actually were listening, and they had their Bibles open. And we went through, and I talked to them about, the whirlwind, and God wasn't in it. And the earthquake, and God wasn't in it. And the fire, and God wasn't in it. But God was in the still, small voice. And everybody was sitting there just with the most peaceful expression on their face, except one person, the pastor. I looked at him, and he's there going, oh. He was just really not into it. It was really bothering him. I think he felt just so ashamed. I hope he went and changed after that. But it was just an incredible experience. God just talked to me in the still small voice, gave me everything I needed to get out of that situation that I had no possible human knowledge to deal with. And I just think about Elijah. He knew that voice. He could hear that voice. He didn't get anything from all the noise, but he got it from the voice. Elisha, he listened to that voice. Noah, he listened to that voice. Enoch, he listened to that voice a lot. They talked back and forth. They were so familiar with each other. That still, quiet, small voice that speaks to your heart, speaks to your mind. And it just makes me think, I need to be able to hear it. I cannot take things into my body or have things in my environment that stop me from hearing that voice. There's so much that affects us. The media, it can interfere and it can take over. Just completely take over. You ever watch the television? You ever talk to a car salesman? They want to sell you a used car? Are you a little suspicious during that process? You're asking about all the transmission and the engine, what's the compression like, and have they changed the oil, and all these things. You're asking these questions. You're very suspicious, and you're exercising judgment, good judgment. You're using the frontal lobe of your brain. You're thinking very carefully. You are having these alpha waves going on in your brain. 4 minutes of watching the TV and they switch to beta. And now you are doing a download. No more scan, it's just pure download. And whatever the program director and the writers and the producers had intended, that whatever message they intended for you, that's the message you're probably going to get. And the more information you absorb into your mind, the more it becomes a part of your character. Some people think, yeah, really what I do doesn't affect me. When you look at diet, we talked about all these enzymes and things in the live foods. One thing that was shared with the Seventh-day Adventist Church was to steer away from eating flesh foods. Let's stop eating the cows. Let's raise apples or mangoes or whatever. And stop killing the poor chickens. They want to live too. All of these things that are decades behind us, generations behind us, things that we've known. But it's kind of hard to change old habits. I wasn't necessarily raised a vegetarian, my wife was. And when we got together, our first date, I took her out for a steak. And she wouldn't eat it. I wasn't really happy. I didn't want to eat 2 steaks, and I wasn't leaving it there because I bought it. I walked out of there looking like Santa, and we had a lot of discussions. Then I discovered that she didn't know how to cook anything. Her mother never taught her how to do anything in the house. So I had to teach her how to cook. And then she went off and decided we were going to change our lifestyle, and I told her that she could change her address. And we went through a lot of semi-painful metamorphosis before we got to where we are today. But I was always like, I want my meat. I'm from a meat and potato steak. From that state, that's what we ate back there, sort of the thing. And so I looked at what Ellen White said about not eating the stuff, and I thought of it as, I looked at the biology, and it's like, well, you're going to have more incidences of cancer. Well, I'll do other things to make up for it. I'll get more exercise, I'll drink more water, I will undo the damage that I'm doing, and I can still enjoy my big, juicy piece of prime rib. But that's not necessarily what that was all about. In your meat, you have a number of chemicals. You remember Ellen White has talked a bit about when they slaughter the cattle, the chemistry in the cattle's flesh, that when you eat it, the fear and all these things, the stresses and all that, and how they affect you and how they cause an excitement. And she uses a lot of old words that we don't really use anymore. It's kind of like me. I decided I was going to read the Spanish Bible through this year. And it's from Spanish from the late 1800s. I have a little hard time with English from the late 1800s, let alone Spanish from the late 1800s. Some of those words aren't in the dictionary. I don't know what they mean. So sometimes we don't really get what she is saying sometimes when we read her counsels. But I just looked at it and I said, I want to find out the biochemistry of this whole thing. And I began to read extensively on it. And I learned a little fraction of what there is to know. But what really hit me were 2 chemicals that would be found in an animal's flesh when you consume it. And one of them is called arachidonic acid. And arachidonic acid is, it's something that's in your body, but it tells your brain, your frontal brain, it's time to take a nap. And then there's a companion chemical in there, hydroxycorticosteroid number 17. I don't know what 16 does or what 18 does, but I know what 17 does. Or if they even are those other 2. But it goes into the portion of your brain where your lower passions live and says, it's time to do double time. You ever seen a stubborn cow that wouldn't know where it was and wanted to go, and the farmer took the cattle prod and he gave it a shot? Zzz, and it jumps? That's kind of how this works on the neurons in the brain. It stimulates that part of the brain. So now you've got the judgment part slowed down and the animal part sped up. what's going to happen? Satan comes along and he says, what an amazing opportunity to tempt this person, because they are not going to make a good decision. So when we're bought with a price, how do we glorify God in our body and spirit? To me, it's taking all the information that you can get and studying that information and making the choice to do the best you can with what you found. And doing it thoughtfully, prayerfully. And I've come to the point that I don't care what other people think. When my wife and I first came back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church after being gone a long time, we got preyed upon by some fanatical people. And they had us doing all kinds of things that God never intended for us to do. There were folks who said I had to have a long beard. We couldn't cut it. I don't know that it's necessarily a godly thing to have a big long beard with alfalfa sprouts hanging out of the bottom of it. And then there were those folks who said that the girls all had to wear a head covering all the time. And I'm like, I'm not so sure about that, you know. And then my wife decided that she and the girls would only wear dresses always. And I said, okay, I'm okay. I like you guys in dresses. I think you look more ladylike in dresses. I do. I think you look prettier in dresses. But I saw her out on a really, really rank 2-year-old quarter horse, and they were bucking it out. And she's in a long denim skirt. And I ran out there and I grabbed that thing and I said, get off and get a pair of blue jeans on before he kills you. And she's like, what's going to happen? I said, you're going to fall off, you're going to have the skirt wrapped around the saddle horn, and he's going to kick your head off. That kind of woke me up a little bit. But we just went on with all of these fanatical things. And finally one day I said, you know what, we need to get away from all of the people that we know. We need to get off of everyone's mailing list, including the churches, and we need to move to the other side of the country and figure this out on our own with God. And I've come to the point where I'm not going to be influenced by people who are fanatical. I want the truth and I want God to talk to me about it. And if he talks to me about it, then I better be honest enough to respond. I've asked him to do it. It's my responsibility to just do what he tells me. But you're going to hear so many crazy conflicting things if you're not in tune with a still small voice. The still small voice is how Moses knew how to write those books that he wrote from the Bible. The small voice is what all of the Bible was inspired by. The still small voice is what talked to Ellen White in the early mornings. Any of you ever had the opportunity to go to the Elmshaven estate? You know, when I was in her bedroom, where was her great niece who showed the place to me, told me that they would see her secretaries would see a glow under the door and around the room when the angel would come and talk to her. I want that voice, I want that direction, and I want to be honest enough to follow it. And I don't want a bunch of stuff in my biological system that affects my brain to where I can't understand what God's saying to me. And that's why I do the things that I do. And not because somebody tries to guilt trip me into something, but because God said it. And you know, God is very consistent. God's not going to tell you something that's contradictory to what he said to the Bible authors. He's not going to tell you that the things that he told Ellen White no longer hold. He's not going to contradict himself. He is the same today, yesterday, today, forevermore. I mean, just forever. God doesn't change. His messages will be the same. And I've seen throughout so many times within the Adventist church, you've got two groups. One group that's trying so hard to see how far they can get close to the sin without getting into it. And another group trying to get away so far from it that they lose their balance. And God doesn't want you to fall in either one of those categories. God just wants to talk to you quietly, calmly, not contradict anything that He said in the past. You know, I thought what I would say when I came here, I thought, oh, we can talk about all the wonderful natural remedies, but everybody knows about charcoal and cabbage poultices and castor oil and all those things. But hardly anybody knows all these pitfalls that Satan has put in their way. And when I talk to the people who are not of my faith, I really, truly want to have something that's really practical to say to them. I don't want to just put a book in their hand and hope they find their way. I really want to be a part of their life and to be a mentor. And as I discovered these things, I realized that those who are honest in heart in our communities around us and who are searching, who have a hunger and thirst for righteousness, they love when you talk to them with this material because it's practical and it meets them right where they know their needs are. And the voice will talk to them. And you don't have to spend the rest of your time trying to convince them of all kinds of things because the Holy Spirit will do that if they can hear Him and if they recognize His voice. So it really boils down to faith and trust, doesn't it? How well do you know God? Do you really trust Him? Do you know Him well enough to trust Him when it's tough? When I was a kid, my dad was a great big barrel-chested guy, and I was this skinny little stick of bones. And he liked to go swimming. He just loved to go to the lake and go swimming. I did too, but I kind of like to stick around closer to shore because I got tired quick. And he'd just go out and out in the water, and he would just go out into the deep, and he'd just do this, and he'd just sit there. And his head sticking out of the water because he had this huge barrel chest full of, 40 gallons of air in there. He's like a pontoon boat. He said, let's go out there a ways. And I'm like, Dad, I don't think I can swim that far. He said, well, stop and rest. I said, do you know what happens when I rest? He said, you get too worried about it. You just need to relax and trust me. Here, I'll show you. And he goes, oh, I see. You just float like this. And I said, watch me. And I went, got as much air as I could in. I go like this. And I was this far below the surface with the top of my head. Finally, he says, well, you're just too bony to swim. I said, well, I still like to go out there. And he said, well, let's go. I'll show you how we're going to do that. He said, can you trust me? And can you obey me? Can I trust you to obey me? Because if I can, we can do this. I said, okay, I'll do whatever you say. And he said, I don't want you getting in no panic. You got to do what I say. Okay. He said, lay yourself out as flat on the water as you possibly can. You put your hands out on my back. You can keep your face out of the water, and I'll be your raft, and we'll just go on out there. It was a little unnerving knowing that I was in 20 feet deep water. But I knew that I could trust him because he wasn't going to sink. And I could use him as my raft. I knew that. I just knew him that well. And that's the way it has to be with God. You have to have that familiarity with God that you trust everything that he tells you. If you don't, there's a whole lot of other voices out there that you could listen to. And they won't get you where you want to go. It's easy and it's hard. You know what I mean? Easy and hard both. It's easy to say I'm going to trust him, but sometimes when the going gets a little rough, then it gets a little bit hard. whether I'm really truly going to trust him or not. But we need the familiarity with God that our relationship is so solid that no matter how high the waves be, we're not like Peter and we don't get freaked out because we lost sight of him. Yeah, that's some weird stuff I shared with you tonight. You're not going to hear that on the street. But I think it makes a difference. And I would encourage you, go think it through, pray it through, study it through. You can find all this information. It's out there. There's a whole lot of conflicting information out there. You have to sort through it. And while you're sorting, it really helps to hear the still small voice to help you know which one is a really scholarly study and which one is something that somebody funded for a marketing campaign. They always say follow the money, and you can do that. It's good to do that. But I think we've all seen this before, right? You got to make a decision where you're going. You're going straight, you're going to the left, you're going to the right. Where are you going to go? But God is willing to give you the direction so you don't have to face that stuff in bewilderment. You can look at the future and you can just walk forward in confidence, knowing who you believe in. Let's have a prayer. Heavenly Father, you know each one of us intensely well. We have no hidden secrets from you. You can shine your heavenly light into the very depths of our existence. And you know every thought, word, and action we've ever had. You know all of the joys and all of the sadness that we've gone through, all the experiences. There's nothing that you're not aware of. Lord, tonight I want you to shine your marvelous light into our hearts. Show us what's there that shouldn't be. And then, Lord, I ask that you'll have your Holy Spirit speak to our hearts and give us the instructions that we need to follow. Give us the conviction of what is right and what is wrong. And then, Lord, sometimes we just don't like what you say. It's uncomfortable to leave our habits behind. But we know that the power of your grace is sufficient for anything that we come across. You've told us in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16, to come boldly to the throne of grace. Don't come timidly. Don't come reluctantly. To come boldly and confident to the throne of grace, because you've told us that at your throne of grace you have the power that you can give to each one of us liberally, that will enable us to have the desires that will bring us closer to you and closer to salvation. Lord, you know me. You know how stubborn I am. I just ask that you will change my heart, to change everyone's heart. Help us, Lord. We're so stubborn and so rebellious. We're so fixed on our habits. But Lord, when you cut us free, we are free indeed. And I thank you for the victories that we are all going to get in our lives, whatever they are. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen.